Welcome to the Human Tech Podcast, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology, and of course, UX. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hello.
And we actually have two very special guests today, Keith Instone and Adam Dearduff, who are going to be talking to us about, I guess, the state of UX. Um, and they are kind of UX community leaders, specifically in the greater Ohio region where I now reside. And they've been doing some, they have an interesting project that they've been working on for, is it been going on for a number of years? Has been doing it?
Yeah. We've really just started doing research in the past year, but we've sort of been building up our user experience community in Ohio over the past couple of years.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I guess I should introduce everyone. That first voice you heard was Keith. Hi, Keith.
Howdy.
And we also have Adam. Hey, Adam.
Hey, great to meet everyone.
So I guess does one of you want to just kind of give an overview about the what and the why?
Yeah. I'll get us started. So yeah, like you said, like Adam and I live in Ohio, and we've been participating in different user experience communities over the years. I helped set up the Information Architecture Conference long ago. Susan used to visit us in Detroit when we did the Internet User Experience Conference every year. So we've been involved in the community, at global and national scales. But what I've started doing in the past couple of years is focusing on Ohio as a unit of thinking about the user experience community, right? So we have like IXDA chapters in Cincinnati and Columbus, and we have UX Akron as a nonprofit. So we have these little sort of metro-based communities, but I found it useful to sort of get together as the state of Ohio and talk about user experience. So helping connect those different communities that are in the different metro areas, and then start talking about some of the larger issues. And when we complain about, like, nobody can figure out UX job titles, right? Okay, right. The job titles all over the place. Well, we've done some research to document that that's a problem in Ohio, just like it is in Richmond, Virginia, and when Nielsen Norman Group studies it and everything, right? And then once we understand that one, we actually might be able to fix that perhaps at a state level, right? You can't really, that's hard to fix at other levels, but so that's sort of been our focus of thinking of user experience communities and a user experience industry, perhaps even going by the state borders, seeing what we discovered. If nothing else, it's a useful way to network, but we're hoping to also someday help address some of these challenges in our community, at least, at least at a somewhat local level.
Yeah, in Ohio, we have amazing pockets of communities that have been going on for years, like Keith said, and Keith has done an amazing job bringing the leaders of those communities together to have a dialogue across the state of Ohio. And we do think we have something special going on in the UX community. And so the State of UX report for Ohio was really meant to set some benchmarks for where we are as a state today, where there are opportunities for growth, and really how we can help each other as a statewide community uncover similar challenges, topics that we should be talking about as a community, and hopefully actions that we can take.
So I think I just want to before we start, I just want to give my plug for why Ohio is a reasonable state to do this in. Now, one, it is of course the state that was chosen not at random because that's where we all live, and so we're self-serving in that capacity. But there are a lot of benefits to this, I think, from a methodological standpoint. So I think in UX in the United States, there are a couple outliers that are these big market hubs. Obviously, San Francisco, New York City. Maybe you want to throw Boston in there, maybe Seattle, maybe LA.
Maybe Austin. But
maybe yeah, Austin's coming up. And so there are these couple sort of gems. And in these gems, there are, they're just different than the rest of the UX industry, both in terms of opportunity and pay and the types of UXers that are there. So, in some ways, if you did a state of UX in Silicon Valley, it's going to look very different and probably be dominated by some big players, et cetera, et cetera. Conversely, if you did, I'm trying to figure out. I don't want to slander anyone, but there are places in the United States that really do not have much of a design community at all, and there is one. I'm sure there is. But for example, Ohio does have it's a pretty medium big state. There are a couple local regional chapters. Do they really act together as a state culture? Maybe not, maybe kind of. But there are quite a number of very large international companies that employ UXers here. Both, I can only speak for Columbus, but there's healthcare, there's banking, there's finance, there's all sorts of design firms. It's a quite a big mix across a lot of industries of big corporate companies. There are also small independent UX shops as well, making that up, and there are colleges and universities that are sort of have various programs that do UX stuff. So I think it's fairly representative of a lot of the United States communities insofar as it's kind of developed, it's kind of not developed, it's kind of big, it's kind of small, it's kind of fractured. And so I think it's actually a pretty good microcosm of some of the challenges that are facing UX at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I like to think of it as well. So we have things like in Cincinnati, right? Their heritage is in branding. And so that filters down into their UX community feels a little bit different than Columbus, which is more financial services oriented. And Cleveland is much more, a little bit more industrial, right? So there's like people that work at Rockwell Automation and so on. And like a Progressive Insurance in Cleveland has had that, like, a usability lab for 25 years, right? So there's different pockets where it feels a little bit different. And then we also have a rural component where, when you start to see user experience trickle into like a community college in Northwest Ohio, then you know that it's making an impact, right? So,
yeah. So can we actually, because we have an audience that is perhaps an international audience, and so I just want to start with first principles, and I'll try to do this very quickly. So we're in Ohio. Ohio is one of the 50 states in the United States. It's a fairly medium large state with how many people? 11, almost 12 million people live there. It is not so like a state like Illinois, where I used to live, is dominated by one large city, which is Chicago, and then there's a couple small cities around in the rest of the state, but it's relatively empty. Okay, this is not the case in Ohio. Ohio has a couple major cities. There's what's called the three C's, which is Columbus, the state capital where I live, Cincinnati, which is on the southern border, and Cleveland, which is sort of on the north, on one of the Great Lakes. There's also a couple medium large cities, including Dayton. I guess I don't know if you want to include Akron. That's really just part of Cleveland. Toledo. Anything else I'm missing on the Ohio geography?
Yeah, so Akron, Canton, Youngstown, those are medium-sized cities that are near Cleveland that sometimes get folded in, but sometimes they have their own unique characteristics. Like Akron was home to Goodyear for many years, right? So they have this they have that heritage, and so their user experience community sort of built on top of manufacturing. Cleveland has lots of healthcare, and then of course Dayton is a medium-sized city, except if you're looking at in the aerospace industry, in which case they're a global leader, right? Because of the Wright brothers, and they have I don't have the exact numbers. They probably have more aerospace human factors researchers with PhDs in Dayton than in all the rest of the United States or whatever, right? So again, there's this pocket of people that understand airplane cockpits really, really well in Dayton, right? And sometimes those folks then work outside of that industry, and it bleeds off into other parts of the Dayton ecosystem.
Okay, so now that we have a little bit of the geography, can you talk to me about the types of UX organizations that exist in Ohio and in the different cities? Because I'm not sure even if I know the full list of all the, because and then I don't know if you want to do what used to exist in the past as well, because that's an even longer list.
So
When we
go ahead, Adam.
when we think about the big companies across the state that people think of nationally, globally, and how they've built up large UX teams within that organization. You have the Wendy's, the Nationwide Insurance, the Limited Brands. You have in Cincinnati, you have the Kroger's, the Great American Insurance. In Cleveland, you have the Progressive Insurance. So there are a lot of organizations within the cities and in the medium and smaller cities too that have over the last decade or two or three built up those UX presences. But there's also a great community of agencies and consulting organizations across the state that are big and small that have a great community as well, doing work locally, nationally, internationally, with the Accentures, the Insights, the IBMs, all of those, in addition to the smaller agencies.
Yeah. So how about the professional organizations? What exists?
Right. So long ago, there was an ACM SIGCHI group in Columbus called Buckeye, with the pun, right, that was focused on around Ohio State. There were some leading design consultancies like Fitch back in the day that were all based in Columbus, in part because Columbus's heritage was being like a test center, right? If you've got a new product, you test it. You test it in Columbus. To how does it play in the Midwest? So there were lots of sort of those sort of companies. Again, in Cincinnati, there's an Interaction Design Professional Association chapter, right? In part because I think people from Cincinnati went to the IXDA conference when it was in Savannah, Georgia, and they loved it. So when they went back to Cincinnati, they formed a local chapter of IXDA. For many years, we had a UPA chapter, which became a UXPA chapter in Cleveland. Over time, that sort of like has officially closed down. But for many years, they would, for World Usability Day, they would have an all-day conference, right? And so people from across Ohio would go to Cleveland because Cleveland was sort of hosting the big event in the fall for the UX community. So it's a mishmash. And then we also still have pockets of like AIGA, which is graphic designers. So we have pockets of those in the different cities, and pockets of industrial designers. And so traditionally, the industrial designers, that was a totally different group of people. But over time, industrial designers are becoming software designers as well. So we've been trying to collaborate with the industrial designers, perhaps not, if they're going to have a local meetup and talk about some new forms of plastic that are really important to that one. It's like, that's kind of interesting to me, but not super interesting, but I might go. And then, every once in a while, the graphic designers will talk about, paper and ink, which is great. They're welcome to talk about paper and ink and fonts. But when both of those groups start to get into software, then that's when it's useful to cross promote it and get people to sort of go across those traditional design lines.
And I think this is pretty normal in a lot of places, with this sort of organic development and herky-jerky kind of 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, different organizations. It's not sort of solidified even within the state.
All right, I have a question.
Sure.
Being the only non-Ohioan, is that what you say?
Yeah.
I don't even know what to call you guys. See, that's how you know I'm not from Ohio.
We've been called worse.
Yeah, probably. Being the only non-Ohioan on the call. And, it's interesting when you were talking, Keith, I was thinking about, I actually, I haven't done a formal retrospective of, how many talks have I given in the state of Ohio? But as I'm thinking about it, it's like, I've given a lot of talks over the years in the state of Ohio with all these different groups that you're mentioning. I mean, I know, I assume that one of the things that Ohio is seeing that we're seeing all over the U.S., and maybe even is happening internationally, is, much less of this local groups and organizations in terms of a couple things. One, just some of them have died off, right? There used to be a lot more active UXPA chapters than there are now. So some of them have just kind of disintegrated. Others still exist, but maybe aren't as strong, and certainly aren't meeting in person the way they used to. And I know that we tend to, I mean, I think even unconsciously, I and others just chalk that off to, oh, well, the pandemic came and we never came back. But I actually think it's probably more than that. I mean, maybe that was like the last blow kind of thing. But it seemed to me that even before that, there was some weakening. And I'm interested in your perspective on, is that true for Ohio? And then why do you think that is? Is it just the pandemic? Is it too many groups? Is it that, we know that the people getting into UX or people who are active in UX, that's changed over the years. So what's the social, psychological issues that are causing these local, groups to not be as strong? And do you see that actually is starting to change in Ohio?
Yeah, ask like a true social psychologist. Thank you. Yes. Adam, do you want to go first? Because this is like this is part of a 5-part series now with that question.
Yep.
I tend to do that. Yeah,
we've definitely seen that in firsthand communities that haven't come back since the pandemic. That, to your point, some of them might have been getting a little weaker, not doing as many events, not having as much participation. I think there are, like you said, a lot of factors that go into that. Even myself, when the pandemic hit and I was missing some of that interaction, I ended up seeking out other meetups that were doing virtual meetups across the country, and had more of those thriving communities, but there weren't a ton of them, to be honest. From a systematic standpoint or symptomatic standpoint, I mean, where that's coming from is, I do think there's been a lot more burnout since the pandemic hit, and even starting before that, in terms of the community, how much is being asked of people and how busy their days are, not having as much time or energy to commit to the extracurricular. You have a lot of people that kind of started those communities or were foundational to them, that had been doing it for a long time, and at that point having someone else to take the reins over, so they didn't have to shoulder that burden. We're seeing that as well across some of the communities, is the same people carrying that torch for so long can't do it. You need more leaders to step up, and I think that's one of the things that we're kind of yearning for in the community, is what's the next generation of leaders look like, and who's going to step up to do that.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely the burnout. I think the promise of the internet is coming true, right? You don't have to only hang out with people that live within 20 miles of you, right? If there's a community of interest and you have something in common, and those people are scattered in 50 different countries around the world, you can hang out on a venue like this, right? So I think the pandemic accelerated it, and so they were like, hey, here's this great, what was it, the user experience research group, and it was started by a couple of people in Texas. And then the pandemic hit. It says, why do we have to limit this to people in Texas? They just went online and they built this great community of UX researchers. And the two people that founded it probably live 15 minutes from each other, but nobody else does, right? So that's changed it, and that's changed what it means to even be a professional, right? Because a lot of professional organizations, you might belong in a global or local or global level, and then you get all your value, like you do your job hunting at the local level, right? Well, now with remote work and everything, I don't really have to hang out with people that live near me to get a good job. So
there's also the factor of, in the last couple years, at least the last year and a half, hiring managers haven't been able to hire as aggressively and aren't seeking out talent. So being as active in the community and going to some of those events and encouraging their teams to go to some of the events might have dropped off some because they aren't seeking out talent. We're seeing a number of layoffs across the industry and people crunching. And so that might be another piece, not to go to the dark side of what's going on in the industry, but I think that may play a factor.
Yeah, the currency of many local chapters in the past was jobs, right? So the people that were looking for jobs showed up, and the people that were looking for employees paid for it to get together, right? And then you could have a guest speaker there for extra, but it was mostly just a job hunt exercise, a local job fair.
Yeah, I think there's also just been the last, in the economy in general over the last 5 years has just been a turbulent time between pandemic, supply chain stuff. Now we're having tech layoffs. It's just been a lot of up and down. And so I think from a physical standpoint, I think a lot of people have been moving and relocating and switching jobs and switching roles. And so there are people who may have been running a chapter for a decade that move somewhere else or switch jobs or switch careers or, whatever the case may be. And so that sort of upheaval within society generally kind of trickled down. And so the stability that was kind of holding some of these groups together, it kind of fell apart.
Yep. But at the same time, right? So there's one person, Lori. She helped organize the UXPA chapter in Florida. She now moved to Columbus, and she's helping reinvigorate. Right, she's some new blood with new ideas that's helping reinvigorate the UX community in Columbus. Right, so yeah, sometimes it's somebody who's leading a local community has a kid, gets a new job, or just leaves the job market and retires, or whatever. Lots of things happen. So a lot of these local communities were pretty fragile. If one person quit, then the whole local group died. So
yeah, and so they may be growing. There's a lot of people who entered the workforce during the pandemic and may not even know that local meetups are a thing that exist. So maybe you're starting to see growth there. So.
Do you think part of it is? I remember, and I apologize, but I'm old enough now that I have earned the right to say back in the day.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I remember the feeling, and many people said the same thing to me, going to either a local or a national group event in our field. One of the most exciting things about it, we used to say things like, well, for 3 days I can be with people and I don't have to try and explain what I do, because they understand. Because it was esoteric. There weren't a lot of people doing it, and it was hard to explain what you did. And now, that's still, I guess, somewhat true, but not as true, right? And unfortunately, there's now a lot more people in the world that think they know what UX is. Actually, they don't, but they think they do. So there isn't that sense of, and also I wonder if it's a sense of, again, because it was new and you felt like you were fighting the good fight, and it was this mission. We were all on this mission. And now I wonder if it's become so mainstream that incredible desire to be in person with like-minded people who were really passionate about the same things you were, that might not be true anymore for UX. I wonder, of course, I'd love to see that kind of passion come back.
Yeah, so we could say like we're a victim of our own success, right? Because in the past, right, again, you went to a conference and usually people would say, I found my tribe, right? And then they would go back and form a local version of their tribe that they had found nationally, kind of thing. And it definitely had a mission to it, and us against the powers that be or whatever.
Right.
But what's changed is, right, over time, like things like the U.S. News and World Report would report what are the 20 hottest jobs in the world. And one of them was a UX designer. And so a lot of people said, well, that sounds like a fun job and I'll do it. But they did it because it was a hot job, not because they had like our path was like, I had struggled with making technology and it sucked, and I wanted to make the world a better place. So there I got into user experience after having this other experience, versus, do I want to be a dentist, a policeman, or a UX designer? Right? All those will pay the bill, and I'll just pick that one, right? So
I remember my first experience kind of with that moment of finding my tribe was, I think it was 2011 was the first Midwest UX in Columbus, Ohio, that was held at the AEP, American Electric Power building. And we had some rock stars of UX, Jesse James Garrett and Jared Spool, and folks come in, and it was that first time that people from the Midwest had kind of that hub event where people could come in and be part of that tribe, at least that I had experienced in my career. Excuse me. So just speaking to that moment for me, but also in the survey, we heard a lot of that type of passion and excitement of people that were still excited to be part of that meaningful career. They felt like they had purpose with their work they were doing, and their desire to continue to make life better through their work. And that was really something that was exciting for me to see. And on the other side, you did see people that had been in the industry a long time have some skepticism about the new generation of professionals coming into the field. And did they have the foundational training? Did they come up through boot camps that might not have been as thorough as their training has been, or not teach all the things that they hoped they would teach? So there was kind of two sides of the coin there in terms of what the feelings about the future of UX.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, Adam, can you talk more about the survey?
Well, I was going to say, do we want to just transition now into the survey a little bit?
Yeah, I want to hear about the research.
Apologies, I just kind of found an opportunity and started talking.
No, that's good.
Well, that's good. That is what in theory, you guys were here to talk about as well. So how about let's start from the beginning. What is the survey, and how did you guys do it?
Right. So part was, again, I was helping organize UX folks around the states, but we're also doing in the context of a lot of attention now is being put into these different technology hubs, right? Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur tech hub. This is the key to economic development, right? If you want your part of the world to be successful, you have to have software companies in it producing things, and you have to have startups disrupting markets and so on, right? So in that context, we said, well, if Ohio wants to be a tech hub, then we also have to be great at user experience, or else we're going to be making tech that makes life worse for people. Or these large companies will make tech, and they, without a great experience, they won't be as competitive in the marketplace, right? So again, it's like, well, if that's the case, if we need to get better as a state in order to be successful, then how are we doing as a state? Do we have enough UX people in Ohio already? Do we have too many? Are they all great at user research, or are they all great at design, so that we can fill in the gaps? Starting to document what we informally thought of, like, at Miami University they're great at teaching this, and at Cleveland State they're great at teaching this, and Ohio State they're great at teaching this. But like, how great are we really at teaching this stuff? So that was really the beginning of it. We wanted to start to collect some data to see. We think Ohio's great at UX, but maybe we suck. I don't know. Let's collect some data and see, right?
Yeah, it was much different than some of the trends reports we see out there that are talking about what we see the future of UX being as far as the work goes, and talking about migrating interfaces and AI. And this was more around the practice in the community and the profession within the state, and how do we elevate the visibility of what's going on? How do we set the benchmarks for growth and maturity, and connect companies and communities around action we can be taking together? So we had 75 total participants in the initial survey, which isn't a statistically significant sample size, but it's something that we can use as a barometer for the future. And hopefully, as we do more of these, we'll see elevated responses, we'll see the impact and change and evolution across the community. One of the things that we mentioned before was the number of different job titles. And so we had 59 different companies and 60 different job titles represented within the survey, which is awesome, but also something that we addressed in some of the feedback is that not everyone is labeling things the same way. Not everyone has the same expectations, which becomes a big challenge for the profession and hiring for the same skills across companies. And especially for training, when you're talking about developing talent, education, the criteria and career paths, that where do people go next? What do they learn next with this amount of information that they could learn and the amount of content that's out there today? There's a lot of time unpacked just in the career path discussion.
Right. So yes, again, we found, not surprisingly, that our job titles and career paths are a mess. Oops, we lost Adam. We'll be back. But again, like I started looking at other results of, so like somebody's been doing a survey in Richmond, Virginia for a couple of years. Their number one result is our job titles and career paths are a mess in Richmond, Virginia, right? If you read the Nielsen Norman Group sort of global things, they have another section. Our job titles are a mess, right? So again, we're not unique in Ohio around our job titles being messy. So we haven't solved it. So one would be like, maybe we solved it in Ohio that nobody else has solved it. That's not the case, right? But now that we know that, like, we might be able to take some action in Ohio to fix that. Maybe, it's hard to fix nationally, but maybe if we could get the top 10 UX employers in Ohio to all get together and agree on a few things, we might be able to clean it up a little bit for Ohio at least, right?
Do you have some examples of what a messed up job title soup means?
Yeah. Do you have some actual examples, Adam, from?
Yeah. So of the 75 folks that responded, only 26 of the job titles included UX as part of the job title, and 34 included design. There are only 8 that were included the keyword research. So you would think as a UX professional, somewhere in there you would have design, UX, research, and really that made up a half or less of the job.
What were some? Do you happen to know off the top of your head what some of the other non-UX roles were?
Some of them were in product.
Okay.
Some of them were just like, we did have one business analyst, we had strategists, we had it's interesting kind of the diversity that we got into and the departments that they sat in. So it wasn't just the titles, but you had people sitting in marketing communications group, in the IT organization, in product development, and then there were some UX research and design teams, but that wasn't the majority. There were only 10 respondents that said they actually sat in that department.
So we asked some individual, like, what is your job title? Then, like, what part of the organization do you exist in? And that was all across the map. Now, again, we could debate whether that was a bug or a feature, right? Because for some, we might think, oh, everybody should have a UX department. But some models, I think some models work better where, like, you just have a UX team in 4 different departments. That could be more effective. It depends on the maturity of the organization and lots of other things, right? But again, we at least wanted to document, maybe by dumb luck, half the people we found all work in the UX department. Okay, then that could help us with either future programming or just understanding what to do next. So.
This is not surprising. I don't think we're going to solve this today. But the lack of standardization around anything, even departments, titles, what the roles are. I mean, this is Susan, you and I have talked about this on the podcast a number of times, and it causes all sorts of confusion about, for people not in the field, right? Like if you say, hey, what's like a back end software developer, that's kind of a pretty standardized, and there I'm sure maybe people who are actually doing that would yell at me and say, no, it's all over the place. But for the most part, like if I walk into a company and it's like, hey, I need to find the people who are doing Java and they're coding, like back end Java stuff, like I probably can find them,
Right.
fairly quickly. And if it's like, hey, I need the people who are doing research on what the users are thinking, could be anywhere, could be any role,
Yeah.
could be in product, could be somewhere else. So it's a lot of, it has caused a lot of confusion. I know when we talk to our clients, we have been on calls where I'll just, one very quick anecdote. There was a engineering group, and it was a big engineering meeting, and they were talking about initiatives that were going on, and they said, we just wanted to thank the UX team for all the work they did. And check this out, they had these mock-ups, all this cool stuff, and it's like the UX team actually didn't do any of that. That was a marketing team that had kind of come in and so like even within the organization, they didn't know what the UX team was doing or who was doing what or what UX is. So it definitely not surprising and certainly a problem. And as I've said before, my little mini soapbox is part of that is also the fracturedness of the professional organizations as well.
Correct.
Like you mentioned, some of them are more hardware focused, some of them are more or development, software dev coming out of that. Some of them are coming out of graphic design. Some of them are, even the difference between UXPA and IXDA is they're sort of the same, but they're different, even though they kind of overlap a lot. So
Yep.
certainly a continued problem.
One of the pieces to your point that we heard a lot about was the research side and the fact that not very many folks had research in their title, but 69% of the respondents said they actually did research as part of their jobs. And some of that brought to light the question of the training side is research being so foundational and getting feedback, doing studies, usability testing, all that, and the implication that means in making decisions. And if we have 69% of that sample size doing research, are they getting the appropriate training? Are we doing the right thing from a business standpoint based on folks doing unbiased research or biased research within product teams, UX teams, IT teams? What does that look like? And I think having a clear picture of what that, for me, growing up in the Nielsen Norman, doing a lot of education into doing research before I did it and making sure I was asking all the right questions, especially with the questions we're going to be asking of AI in the future and products that use AI. Research is going to be more and more integral to what we do. And so how do we create learning journeys, standardizations around what people should be doing? I know some of those are already out there, but are we encouraging usage of those? And do we have a standard practice that we all should be following?
Right. And so, yeah, so our professional organizations are scattered. And again, some people think that's a bonus, right? Because then I can draw from some graphic design skills and some anthropology skills or whatever, right? So we have the constant debates of whether, standardize too much and then we can't be innovative and change, right? But for me to make some of these changes, we're going to have to impact the institutions like K through 12 education, right? So we were, again, hoping to have some data just so that we could say if, we've had other people, in our local communities, like how do we help, how do we help our local schools teach some of these concepts, at least in K through 12, so that later on they even know that these careers exist, right? And so we've collaborated a little bit across the state. But in the end, the K through 12 curriculum is set by some state department, right? So I've started going to those meetings because there are people that work for the state of Ohio in our Department of Education, and they're trying to like we have to start figuring out like what are the jobs of the future, right? So they've got things like AI prompt engineer, right? They're trying to figure out what that means and what is the right way to teach it at K through 12. And maybe the answer is never, right? That might be the answer, right? But I've also gone to some of those meetings to help them understand these user experience careers, which are part tech, part design, part psychology kind of stuff, because they don't normally fit into, there's not a UX class in K through 12. Do you teach it in the advanced computer science class, or do you teach it in art class, right? Some of the concepts you could teach in 6th grade art, for example, right? So, but again, just, if we want to impact some of these things at a more institutional level, then, for us as UX practitioners, we can't just hang out with ourselves and complain about it. We've got to go be a part of these institutions and help at least educate them so that they can start thinking about it.
Okay, cool. If no one else wants to add anything else, what's another snippet from the survey? Anything else interesting jumps out?
One that I would touch on is most of the organizations from an education standpoint, and to piggyback on what Keith was saying, they don't require people to have specific degrees to get into the UX field. And while it was a nice to have for a lot of them in terms of it would be great to have someone with a bachelor's degree or master's degree, the people on the team had come from all different kinds of backgrounds and may have had a bachelor's degree in another field, but we're now doing UX work. And I think that's something that we've seen for a long time, at least me as a hiring manager. I've hired people with lots of diverse backgrounds, but the idea that UX spans so many things: research, cognitive science, psychology, computer science, graphic art, or graphic design and art. There's so many pieces and parts that can feed into what UX does and the places where people can get excited about UX. We're seeing that across a lot of organizations, but the experience, the quality of the work, the foundational things in education of doing UX, that's really where people are getting hired.
Right. So like as a specific example, like I think we asked like, what is your level of education? But we also asked, what is the level of education of your teammates? Knowing that like chances are we're not going to get the survey filled out by a representative sample. And we had 51%, they said my teammates are self-taught, 51% self-taught, and 49% had a boot camp or certificate, right? So that meant, again, half of the people that filled out our survey were in regular contact with self-taught boot camp people. We also had 56% with a master's degree, which probably 90% of those have a master's degree from Kent State, because we happen to have a great program at Kent State, and so on. But and then I haven't gone yet to sort of compare, because like Nielsen Norman Group asked similar questions, right? What is your educational background, right? But in general, those seem about the same. If anything, we might have a few more master's degree than average, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's just sort of a continuation on the theme of the hodgepodge of the UX community.
Definitely. And identifying skills gaps was another piece of that. So we asked the folks to ask what the biggest skills gaps they've observed within their teammates that are new to the organization. And number one was research. That came up more than anything, which pairs well from the learning before, where 69% of the respondents are doing research, but that's observed as the biggest skills gap across teammates. So that there's a juxtaposition there of education and skills versus the practice.
I think that tracks with, in my head, a lot of recent trends. I think a lot of people have been entering the UX field from the design side,
right,
more than from the research side.
Right.
Just there are more people who have that design gift than have the analytical research gift.
Yeah.
It just sort of seems so. It would make sense that if everyone's coming to the same central place, if you have a lot more people coming from the design side, there's going to be, but according, like you said, but everyone needs to probably know how to do a little research, or most people do. That definitely seems to be that it would be a gap for sure.
Right. And I think some of it is, again, some larger companies' understanding of user experience and design is at a surface level. So they want to hire somebody who makes pretty screens, right? And there is value to that one. But if they don't understand the deeper stuff, like the psychological implications and everything, then they're going to hire people that make pretty screens, not somebody who can actually do the deep research, right? So even if they have this mishmash job title of a UX jack of all trades, they're probably going to hire the designer over the researcher, even if they have the researcher right in front of them, right? And then some of the other skills that we're missing, more like corporate strategy kind of stuff, which is lower on the list, which is to be expected, because that's something you have to pick up over time. But right, Adam, right, our number two missing skill was UX fundamentals, right? So hey, right, like the word fundamentals shouldn't be your second biggest skill need, right? So
that was a red flag. The UX fundamentals and design proficiency were like, well, seems like something you would want to be able to screen for.
Interesting. Okay. Are there other more interesting points if you wanted to continue? I don't know how many fascinating things you have, though I have seen this presentation before.
You can stop me if I go into something or keep asking questions, but I'd be interested to hear everyone's thoughts on this. So in some of my follow-up conversations with folks after the survey, the conversation around the number of people portraying themselves to be experts and the amount of disciplines and things that you could learn as being part of a UX professional is vast. And so a lot of people coming up may have imposter syndrome and feel like they have a paralysis of where to go from here, whether that's on their learning journey, whether that's in their career progression, or whether that's just feared of putting themselves out into the community, that they aren't good enough or they don't know enough. And so I think that's something that we've seen that over time, not just in the UX community, but a lot of what you see out there is polished, or the facade of being a polished, put together, not having flaws in the work. And I found quite the opposite with myself, where I remember all of the things that I've made mistakes on from the time when I was doing information architecture and wireframes and in PowerPoint, to doing usability tests where I was asking biased questions. Like, I've learned a lot over time, and I think that vulnerability in putting ourselves out there as a community, to each other, to be able to grow through seeing mistakes and flaws, is something we could do better on.
So yes, okay. So what exactly did you have a question for the group then?
Yeah, the question for me is, do you believe that we don't showcase our flaws and are transparent around where we make mistakes in our UX career enough that people can learn from or feel comfortable learning from other professionals?
Probably. I think often, well, if I need to psychoanalyze the entire UX community, I do think that I don't and I don't know about imposter syndrome, but I do feel like there is a feeling of lack of being taken seriously by a lot of people, especially I think a lot of UXers find themselves in a room full of developers or engineers who don't care what they have to say and don't treat anything they do as valid, or what are you doing, or this is just your opinion, right? And and there's a lot more than goes into it. Or I think oftentimes a lot of UX work is sort of lumped into the aesthetics of design, just make it look pretty, but it's so much more than that. And so I think there's a strong desire to be taken seriously, because there are times when it's like, hey, I have research, we tested this, we did this, I have. It's not just I think X or Y. Like, there's a reason and a process and work that goes into all of this. And so I think there's a desire to be taken seriously. And so if you show any cracks in the facade, in saying, I'm like, oh, well, I'm not really an expert, I don't really know how to conduct these like, if you show any cracks, then suddenly the whole kind of structure crumbles. And then, well, all the UX stuff is just made up and none of it has any value. And so I think a lot of UXers really need to be perceived as that they know what they're doing in their organization, and maybe that kind of trickles over through into just their persona of UX, because to show flaws and to show weakness kind of seeds all the ground to the people who don't want to do what they have to say. That's my psychoanalyzing the entire profession.
Yeah, I've seen that in lots of different ways. So one way, often, when we're doing projects, we're iterating. So we're like proposing, rough sketches early on, right? And if you're in this client thing, again, I've had some clients like, never show me your work in progress, just give me the finished product kind of thing, right? Because like, I paid you for your expertise, you do your wizardry thing, you give me the answer, and so on, right? And so again, to me, that's a client who just thinks that they're just buying it, right? They're just buying it, your expertise, when they realize our real value is when we have the conversations with them and they learn along the way, right? So I was talking to one person that I collaborate with, and he was recapping a day he spent with his clients. Again, he his company was hired to build us a new website, right? So he's spending a day talking with the CEO of this company around building this new website. And he's, the UX person is asking lots of questions around, who's our core audience? Is this our business model? Is this our business model? And, these were hard questions that the CEO didn't always have answer for. And eventually, the conclusion was like, I thought I hired you for the website, but you're like a really valuable business consultant, right? You're helping me think about my business, because you're not just trying to build a website because I sketched something on a napkin and you just listen to me. You're asking these hard questions about who are our customers? What is their strategy? What do our customers really want? That's, again, the business knows their customers, but they often don't know it at the same depth that we force them to know it, right? So again, I see these sort of playing out many ways. That yesterday was a positive example where somebody, a business leader, finally understood, oh, the value of this UX stuff is not just the end resulting website, it's the journey along the way to help us fix some of our business problems, which then result with a website that's great, right? But there's lots of other examples where, like, I tried to get the stakeholders to give me feedback on the wireframes, and they never listen until the very last minute, and then they puke all over it. What are you going to do, right? So,
right. I definitely think that's also a maturity level conversation in terms of getting to the point where you understand the impact on the business and how to have those conversations. Because to Guthrie's point, you might have gone up your whole career kind of trying to make sure people took you seriously and took your work seriously and trusted it, to the point where you can make business recommendations and have insight into things that are validating, that aren't just the designs, right? It's the concepts, and it's the product strategy and insights that you're delivering back that are validating. It's not me proving that I put the button here or labeled it this or that.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about AI at all?
Do we have to?
All right. Well, here we'll do. You can tell me what you have in your survey, and we'll maybe give some short thoughts, and then we'll wrap up here.
The biggest piece to me is I think this wasn't a widespread piece of feedback, but it was a topic that people were interested in and excited and challenged by. It kind of hit all the different nodes of the conversation. And I think with the acceleration of what we're seeing and what that implications might be for the UX profession or the types of activities that we performed in the past, we have to be thinking as a community how we get a seat at the table and evolve our practice or where we sit in the process for tools, for technology that leverage AI. And that means getting closer with the product communities and product profession. That means getting closer with data and analyst groups and professions to where we're still able to keep humans at the center of the process and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. But it may not be a traditional interface. The conversational UX that we've been talking about for a long time is back with generative AI, and that's not a new thing, but we have to be working further upstream in terms of understanding what the implications are of AI on products, people, business.
Yeah. Well, I'm not entirely surprised, and I'm sure that the UX teams are sort of kind of caught in the middle of some of these changes, as they UX usually sits at an intersection of a lot of different business units, and that's sort of where things kind of get mashed together, or things get lost, or things get complex.
Yeah. I think of it and some other emerging tech at 4 different layers. One is like it makes lots of new, great, awesome experiences possible, right? So people are getting excited. We can use AI to make our customer service better and all those things. So like that's great, and especially because there's a lot. We sort of grew up more in the GUI world where all the controls were there in front of you, and AI is going to make it possible where the user can just specify what they want their end goal to be, and the AI will make it happen, right? Versus designing a screen that has to allow for a 20 screen flow, right? So lots of new experiences are possible. The next layer, though, right? It will definitely, AI and other advanced tech will have an impact on the activities that we do every day, right? The way we do personas should change, right? Now, am I saying that we should just go to ChatGPT and tell it to generate our personas? No, but these tools will infect some of those deliverables. There's startups there that are like, hey, just type in a description of the app and it will generate all the screens for you, right? And so that's going to be out there, whether it's a good thing or not. So we'll have to deal with that. And then the third is like within organizations, we've talked about like all those challenges of sitting in the middle of the business. Well, now there's going to be an AI division of a company. Should UX be part of the AI division, right? So or not. So there's lots of, I see lots of sort of organizational capabilities, right? If an organization wants to be great at AI, they're still going to have to be great at UX. But if they weren't very great at AI or UX before, when it was simple, it's going to be a lot harder for them to be great at UX in this complicated AI world, right? Mm-hmm. And then the last is like, how do we teach all of this stuff, right? How do we, people are going to have to go to school. They're going to have to learn all this new technology and other things, these new methods. So there's, I think there's just ripe area to, again, somebody's probably somewhere in the world's developing a new higher, program in higher education that's a UX AI combined degree of some sort, right? And those, how could somebody in Ohio, like, somebody in Ohio hopefully is thinking of some of that. How do we help spur some of that so that we can, whatever this new sort of educational community has to be, let's help figure that out.
All right. Well, there is more, but I think we should start to wrap up as we've hit our hour, and I don't want to keep you guys all day. if people want to get in touch, if they have questions, what's the best way for you guys?
Yeah, they could send me an email. I don't know what sort of show notes you have or whatever with this one, but they could contact me, Keith Instone, find me on LinkedIn. What's my shortest email address that they could use of the fewest symbols would be keith@ohiox.org. That's the smallest one. But
That's a good one.
I mean, we're pretty active out in the community as well. So it's usually easiest to like find me on LinkedIn, send me a note. That would be pretty safe.
Same with
Yeah.
me on LinkedIn. My extension is just my name, Adam Deerduff, or you can email me at adamdeerduff@gmail.com.
And of course, info@theteamdev.com is how you can get in touch with me. I can forward stuff along. If anyone has any further questions, I think it's great that we have just a little bit of interesting data about UX professionals. I don't think these kind of things happen enough, and I appreciate you guys coming on and just talking about the state of UX a little bit. I know we've been trying to do this for a while, but as people may or may not know, I may or may not have a screaming 2-week-old at home. So things may be busy at the moment. So I appreciate you guys find some time to come on and chat with us about this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, happy to be on the show. Happy to hang out with Susan once again. It's been a while, so anytime.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. All right, have a great day, guys.
Have a good